I gave birth, but he died. The beginning of the lie. Behind a closed door, a life faded into silence. Today, we reveal a heartbreaking true story about a boy who was hidden from the world for 2 decades. If you believe these voices deserve to be heard, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. Your voice matters. Together, we shine a light on the forgotten. The boy was born on a heavy, humid morning in Jackson, Mississippi. The sky outside the hospital windows churned with dark clouds, and the smell of an impending storm seeped into every corner of the building. When he entered the world, his cries were weak, barely loud enough to reach the nurses bustling around the delivery room. The doctors quickly realized something was wrong. They told his mother, Emily, that her baby had cerebral palsy, a diagnosis that meant years of therapy, endless hospital visits, and a future filled with uncertainty. Emily did not react immediately. She stared at the ceiling, numb, the sound of her child's faint breathing blending with the distant rumble of thunder. That night, while rain battered the streets of Jackson, she made a decision she would never admit aloud. By morning, the hospital records showed that the baby had died. No birth certificate was filed, no funeral service planned. Only Emily knew the truth. The boy was still alive, bundled quietly in a faded blanket, hidden in the back seat of her car. She drove him to her modest house on the outskirts of town. It was an aging white bungalow with cracked paint and overgrown grass, the kind of place where secrets could rot unnoticed. Inside, she prepared a closet, a cramped space in the hallway, barely big enough to stretch out a mattress. There was no window, no ventilation, only darkness and the stale air of neglect. Emily laid him there, gently at first. A small foam mat became his bed, a cracked water bottle his only comfort. "Stay silent," she whispered. "If you make noise, they'll come and take you away." At first, the boy cried, his tiny voice desperate for warmth and connection. Emily responded with long hours of abandonment. Sometimes she banged on the door. Sometimes she let hunger do the talking for her. Quickly, the boy learned that silence meant survival. The closet became his entire world. He forgot the feeling of fresh air on his skin, forgot the sound of laughter, forgot the concept of daylight. While he faded into the shadows, Emily rebuilt her public life. She returned to waitressing at the local diner, smiling and pouring coffee with mechanical charm. At church, she sang hymns about grace and endurance, earning whispered admiration from those who knew her tragedy. Neighbors waved at her across their driveways. Pastors offered prayers. No one wondered why she never spoke about her child again. No one asked hard questions. The seasons changed beyond the closet door. But inside, nothing moved except the slow, withering decay of a life unlived. The summers in Mississippi turned the house into an oven. The winters chilled the walls until the boy shivered against the thin mattress. Sometimes he pressed his ear against the door, trying to catch fragments of the outside world. A dog barking, children riding their bikes, the jingle of an ice cream truck on a distant street. Each sound was a ghostly reminder that life continued, for everyone except him. His body weakened with each passing year. Bones softened from lack of sunlight. Muscles wasted away from disuse. His skin paled into a colorless canvas, marked only by the slow progression of time. Emily convinced herself that she was protecting him. She told herself that the world was cruel, that people would only hurt him. Better he stay hidden. Better he stay silent. She hosted barbecues. She attended town meetings. She volunteered at church bazaars. Always smiling, always perfect. No one suspected the truth. The boy remained invisible, a ghost, haunting the hollow walls of a home that no longer remembered love. When he grew too restless, Emily would threaten him with stories of monsters who took away disobedient children. She spoke in low, menacing tones until fear erased any remaining spark of rebellion. The years blurred together. Birthdays passed without candles. Holidays passed without gifts. He lived in a timeless purgatory, where each moment was identical to the last. In Jackson, life went on. The mailman delivered letters. The neighbor across the street planted roses. Families gathered for 4th of July fireworks, unaware that only a few houses away, a life was being stolen inch by inch. Sometimes, late at night, the boy would dare to dream of blue skies, of green grass, of running, not crawling, through open fields. But dreams were dangerous. Dreams led to hope. Hope led to noise. Noise led to punishment. So he buried his dreams deep inside himself, locking them away just as Emily had locked him away. And Jackson, Mississippi, a town built on the values of family and community, remained blissfully ignorant. Because sometimes true horror does not hide in dark forests or abandoned houses. Sometimes it smiles at you from across the street. Sometimes it sings louder than the pain it hides. And sometimes it thrives exactly where no one dares to look, until the scream can no longer be ignored. Secret life in the closet. The closet had no windows, no light, no promise of escape. For the boy, whose name was Ethan, it became more than just four walls. It was his entire universe. At first, Ethan tried to mark the passing of time. He would scratch faint lines into the wooden floor with a broken piece of plastic, counting the days by the sounds outside the house. Morning birds meant it was a new day. The creak of the mailman's boots meant it was mid-morning. The distant roar of lawnmowers signaled afternoon. But over the years, those sounds blurred. Winter storms muffled everything. Summer heat made the walls pulse with suffocating stillness. Soon, Ethan abandoned any attempt to count time. The days became endless, indistinguishable from each other. Inside the closet, the air was heavy, often damp, carrying the musty smell of mold creeping along the baseboards. Sometimes, when Emily left the house for work, he dared to whisper songs he remembered from a time before memory itself seemed to betray him. Nursery rhymes, bits of hymns he heard through the walls. But he was careful. He never sang above a breath. Noise was danger. The only light Ethan knew was the faint sliver that bled under the door. He would lay on the creaky mattress, staring at that glow, pretending it was the sunrise he had never truly seen. Food was rare and unpredictable. Sometimes Emily would leave a crust of bread, a half-empty bottle of water. Other times he would go entire days with nothing but the taste of stale air. His body adapted in cruel ways. His stomach shrank, his muscles atrophied. Sores opened along his spine where the mattress springs poked through. Yet still, Ethan endured, because survival was all he knew. Beyond the walls, Emily lived her life. She baked cookies for community fundraisers. She led prayer groups. She became a pillar of the neighborhood. No one guessed the real reason why she never invited visitors inside. At night, when she returned home, the air grew even heavier. Ethan would listen to her footsteps, each one like a drumbeat of dread. If she had a good day, she might ignore him entirely. If not, she might kick the door lightly, a reminder that his existence was a mistake she had to keep hidden. He learned the sounds of her moods. The sharp slam of a cabinet meant anger. The slow scrape of a chair meant exhaustion. The quiet meant danger. A brewing storm just beneath the surface. One evening, during a particularly brutal summer, a neighbor named Mrs. Parker knocked on Emily's door. She had seen strange flickers of movement through the side window and came to check if everything was all right. Emily answered with a bright smile and a laugh. "Just the cat getting into trouble," she explained, waving Mrs. Parker away. Inside the closet, Ethan curled into himself, trembling. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might give him away. For a moment so small it could have slipped between two heartbeats, he hoped Mrs. Parker would push harder, ask to come inside. But no one ever did. The world outside continued obliviously. New neighbors moved in, children grew up, the city paved new roads and built new parks. But for Ethan, the closet remained unchanged. A small, rotting tomb where he waited for a rescue that never came. His imagination became both his sanctuary and his curse. He would close his eyes and imagine wide fields, oceans, mountain peaks. He would picture himself running across grassy hills, his legs strong and steady. Sometimes, in his dreams, he would talk to people who weren't real. Kind strangers who told him he mattered, who promised they would find him. He would wake up with tears on his cheeks, not from fear, but from the cruel hope those dreams gave him. Emily never spoke to him directly anymore. She treated him like another piece of furniture. When she did leave food, she slid it through the crack under the door without a word. Ethan learned to find meaning in tiny details. The texture of the peeling wallpaper near the door. The coolness of the floor during winter. The faint scent of fresh-cut grass when the front door opened briefly. Those were his seasons. His only connection to a world he was forbidden to touch. One night, during a thunderstorm, lightning flashed so brightly that for the first time in years, Ethan caught a glimpse of the closet around him. The stained walls, the ceiling water-damaged and sagging. The flash was gone in an instant, but the image burned into his mind. It was uglier than he had dared to imagine. It was smaller than the world he dreamed of. And it was killing him slowly. Yet still, he clung to life. Because somewhere deep inside, beyond the fear, beyond the silence, beyond the betrayal, a tiny part of him refused to give up. Outside, Jackson lived on, blind and bustling. But inside the closet, a boy's soul screamed for a world that had long since stopped listening. Voice in the darkness. Inside the darkness, Ethan had learned how to survive without hope. But even in absolute silence, a voice cannot be silenced forever. One evening, during an autumn rainstorm in Jackson, Mississippi, Ethan heard something he hadn't heard in years. A noise from outside that wasn't the usual creaks of the house or Emily's hurried footsteps. It was different. It was softer, hesitant, almost curious. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, another cruel trick of a lost childhood. But then, it happened again. A soft rustling near the window. Heart pounding against his fragile ribs, Ethan pressed his ear against the closet door, straining to hear. And then, he heard it. A voice, a child's voice, whispering into the night. "Is someone there?" Across the fence, little Lily, a neighbor's daughter, had accidentally kicked her ball too close to Emily's yard. She had seen something, a shadow at the second-floor window, a faint movement behind the grimy glass. Ethan didn't know what to do. Fear and desperation battled inside him. He had been taught to stay silent. Silence was survival. But some instinct, buried deep beneath the abandoned life he had endured, forced him to act. Gathering all the strength he had left, he rasped out a broken whisper. "Help!" The rain swallowed most of it, but Lily froze. She heard something, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. Terrified, she grabbed her ball and ran home, heart hammering in her chest. That night, she told her father about the voice. Her father, a fireman named Robert, had seen enough horror stories in real life to know when a child was telling the truth. He decided not to ignore it. The next morning, Robert made a quiet call to the police. Officer Taylor, a seasoned cop with tired eyes and a heavy heart, was assigned to check it out. He had seen what hidden survival looked like behind perfectly trimmed lawns and cheerful curtains. When he arrived at Emily's home, nothing seemed amiss. The White House, the well-kept flowers, the welcome mat. Emily answered the door with a bright smile. "Good morning, officer. How can I help you?" "We received a tip about some unusual sounds from this area," Taylor said politely. Emily laughed, the sound sharp and too rehearsed. "Kids and their ghost stories," she joked. But Taylor's instincts prickled. There was something off. Too much nervousness behind the smile, a tension that lingered in the air like smoke. He asked to take a look around. Emily hesitated, then reluctantly stepped aside. Inside the house, everything looked staged. No children's toys, no family photos, just spotless counters and empty silence. As Taylor walked through the hallway, he noticed a door at the end. It was smaller than the others, almost hidden. He approached it slowly. Inside the closet, Ethan could hear the footsteps drawing near. He curled tighter into himself, terror clawing at his chest. He had cried out once. Would it cost him everything? Taylor knocked softly. "Is anyone in there?" A long silence. The ticking of the clock on the mantelpiece. The faint sound of rain against the windows. And then a sound. A weak, trembling voice. "Please, here." Taylor's blood ran cold. Without waiting, he ripped open the door. The smell hit him first. Stale air, damp rot, and something far worse. Despair. Inside, huddled on a thin, torn mattress, was Ethan, pale as paper. Bones protruding against thin skin. Eyes wide, terrified, yet still holding a fragile glimmer of life. Taylor knelt down, speaking gently. "You're safe now, buddy. You're safe." He wrapped Ethan in his jacket, lifting him carefully, as if afraid the boy might shatter in his arms. For the first time in 2 decades, Ethan felt the rush of fresh air against his face, heard the real sounds of the outside world, saw the blurred shapes of officers rushing into the home. He squinted at the daylight. It hurt, burned even, but he smiled. Weakly, but he smiled. Emily tried to protest. She screamed that it was all a misunderstanding, that Ethan was sick and dangerous, that she had been protecting him, but no one listened anymore. The world that had been blind for 20 years finally opened its eyes. In the ambulance, Ethan clutched Taylor's hand with surprising strength. He didn't speak much. Years of silence had stolen his words. But he didn't need to. His broken body, his scarred spirit, his lost childhood, they told the true horror story better than any words ever could. And this time, someone was listening. Suspicion among the neighbors. The news about Ethan's rescue spread quickly through the quiet neighborhoods of Jackson, Mississippi. A boy hidden in a closet for 2 decades. It was the kind of true crime survival story that unsettled even the most hardened residents. Neighbors who once waved to Emily over their fences now whispered behind closed doors. Front porches became stages for late-night theories, pieced together from fragmented memories and half-heard conversations. At first, the community tried to believe it had been fooled, that Emily had simply hidden her troubled son out of misguided love. But as more details emerged, doubt turned to anger. Lily's parents, Robert and Sarah, sat in their kitchen one evening, their coffee long gone cold. "How could we not have seen it?" Sarah whispered, wringing her hands. "We didn't want to see," Robert said grimly. "It was easier that way." They weren't alone. Other neighbors recalled oddities they had ignored. Packages delivered at strange hours, curtains always drawn tight. No friends, no relatives, no laughter. The once friendly facade now looked like a mask, hiding forgotten voices and hidden abuse. Across town, Officer Taylor struggled with the aftermath. He sat in his patrol car late at night, replaying Ethan's weak voice in his mind. "Please, here." Silent suffering had lived just a few streets away, and no one had heard it. The town's mayor made a brief statement about community vigilance. Local news stations ran sanitized reports about keeping an eye on vulnerable citizens. But Ethan's story wasn't clean or easy to digest. It was a raw wound, a reminder that monsters didn't always wear fangs. Sometimes they smiled from across the yard. In a small diner near Maple Street, a group of elderly women clutched their coffee cups tightly. "I always thought she was a little strange," one said. "Remember how she never let the kids trick or treat at her door?" "And the smell," another added. "Last summer, when I walked by, like something rotting inside." The conversations were filled with guilt masquerading as outrage. Meanwhile, Ethan remained in the hospital, under constant care. His body was a map of hidden trauma. Bones that hadn't grown properly, scars along his back and arms, eyes that flinched at every loud sound. Doctors spoke cautiously about his recovery. Psychologists warned that healing from 20 years of abandonment would take more than medical treatment. It would take rebuilding a life from ashes. Despite everything, Ethan showed a will to survive that astonished his caregivers. He learned to trust again, slowly. First with small things, accepting a glass of water without fear, allowing a nurse to touch his arm. Then bigger steps, sitting by the window, watching the world he had never known. At night, Ethan sometimes talked in his sleep. Fragments of forgotten voices, snippets of imaginary conversations he had once whispered to the empty darkness of the closet. Nurses wept quietly in the hallways when they heard. Meanwhile, investigators dug deeper into Emily's life. They found old journals hidden in her bedroom, pages filled with frantic, twisted ramblings about protecting Ethan from the world, about purity and punishment. Emily wasn't a mastermind criminal. She was a broken woman who had convinced herself that cruelty was salvation. But the law didn't care about her justifications. She was charged with multiple counts of abuse, unlawful imprisonment, and neglect. The trial date was set, and for the first time, Emily would have to face a world she could no longer control. The neighbors who once smiled at her now avoided eye contact. Some placed teddy bears and flowers on the sidewalk outside Ethan's former prison, a small, futile apology for their silence. The forgotten voices were finally being heard. But Ethan's story was just beginning. He would have to learn to navigate a world filled with blinding colors, strange noises, and overwhelming choices. He would have to rebuild trust, brick by fragile brick. And the community would have to live with the knowledge that true horror had lived among them, disguised by nothing more than clean siding and a polite smile. The call to 911. The morning after Ethan's rescue, the small town of Jackson buzzed with a strange mixture of horror and shame. While hospital staff worked tirelessly to stabilize the boy's fragile condition, the police department launched a full-scale investigation. But before the headlines, before the news cameras and the whispered apologies, It all started with a simple call, a 911 emergency call that changed everything. Robert sat in his living room, the sunlight barely cutting through the heavy curtains. The words of his daughter Lily echoed in his mind. "I heard a voice, Daddy. It was asking for help." He knew what ignoring signs could cost. In his 20 years as a firefighter, he had seen too many tragedies born from hesitation. With a shaking hand, he picked up the phone and dialed. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher answered, her voice calm and professional. I'm not sure, Robert began, feeling foolish, even as the words left his mouth. But my daughter heard someone, a child, asking for help near a neighbor's house. It sounded wrong. There was a pause. Then the dispatcher's tone shifted. What's the address, sir? Robert gave the location, describing Emily's white house with the red shutters. Stay on the line, the dispatcher said. We're sending an officer to check. The call was logged under possible disturbance. Nothing urgent, nothing screaming for priority. But for Officer Taylor, assigned to follow up, the words, child asking for help, rang louder than any siren. Taylor parked down the block, not wanting to alert anyone prematurely. He approached the house slowly, observing the quiet street, the empty driveways, the neat gardens. Nothing about the house screamed danger, and that was the first warning sign. Taylor knocked, and Emily answered, a tight smile stretched across her face. Good morning, ma'am, Taylor said. We received a call about some unusual noises last night. Mind if I take a quick look around? Emily's eyes flickered, a split-second flash of panic before she recovered. Of course, officer. Kids these days, always imagining ghosts. She chuckled nervously. Inside, the house was immaculate. Too immaculate. There were no signs of a child ever living there. No toys, no photographs, no stray socks under the couch. Taylor's instincts screamed at him. He moved toward the back of the house, where a narrow staircase led to the second floor. The air grew colder, heavier. At the top, he noticed the small, barely visible door tucked away behind a dusty bookshelf. It didn't belong. Ma'am, what's behind this door? He asked. Emily hesitated. Just storage. Old boxes. Nothing important. Taylor didn't wait for permission. He pushed the bookshelf aside and yanked open the door. The stench hit him like a fist, a putrid mix of mold, sweat, and something deeper, hidden pain. In the darkness, he spotted Ethan, fragile, terrified, alive. The boy's whisper, so faint it was almost lost. Help me. The cry for help that Lily had heard, the cry that saved a life. Taylor radioed for backup immediately. I have a found child. Immediate medical attention needed. Possible long-term abuse. House secured. The words came out clipped, mechanical, but his hands trembled as he lifted Ethan into his arms. Outside, sirens wailed down the street. A scream of urgency that had come too late, but not too late to save him. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Some stepped onto porches, covering their mouths in shock. Robert and Sarah arrived, holding Lily between them. The little girl's eyes widened at the sight of Ethan, pale and thin as a ghost, wrapped in a blanket. Is he okay? She whispered. He's safe now, Taylor said, forcing a smile. The paramedics worked quickly, loading Ethan into the ambulance. As the doors closed, Taylor caught a glimpse of Emily being handcuffed, her mouth moving in frantic protests no one wanted to hear. The emergency call had broken the silence. The town could no longer pretend nothing was wrong. A true crime survival story had unfolded right under their noses, hidden behind a picket fence and friendly smiles. And now, true justice would have to begin. The raid and the shocking discovery. Within an hour of Ethan's extraction from the house on Willow Creek Drive, the Jackson Police Department had escalated the situation to a full rescue operation. This was no longer a welfare check. This was a crime scene. Officer Taylor stood outside the house, now cordoned off with bright yellow police tape. The front yard, once so pristine, was now a flurry of uniforms, cameras, and hushed urgency. The neighbors gathered at a distance, their murmurs filling the humid Mississippi air. Nobody dared to get too close. A silent victim had lived among them for 20 years. And now, the hidden horror was unraveling. Detective Maria Lawson arrived at the scene, sharp-eyed, experienced, and relentless when it came to crimes against the vulnerable. Taylor briefed her quickly. The boy was found locked inside a hidden closet. Malnourished, afraid. Looks like he hasn't seen sunlight in years. Lawson nodded grimly. Secure the premises. We need everything documented, every scratch, every stain, every secret this house tried to keep. Crime scene investigators moved methodically through the rooms. Photos were taken, fingerprints dusted, samples collected. At first glance, the house looked normal, painfully, eerily normal. But when they peeled back the layers, the uncovered secrets painted a nightmare. In the closet where Ethan had been kept, they found soiled, threadbare blankets, scratched walls where fingernails had desperately clawed for escape, a broken toy, a small plastic car faded and cracked. Pinned to the inside of the closet door was a torn piece of paper. Written in childish handwriting were the words, "Please, someone find me." Taylor, hardened by years on the force, had to turn away for a moment. It was a rescue operation, yes, but it felt like digging through a graveyard of broken hope. Downstairs, more horrors awaited. In the kitchen drawers, police found medical syringes, some used, some unused, without any prescriptions on file. Hidden among cleaning supplies, they discovered restraint straps, stained and frayed from overuse. Lawson's stomach twisted. This wasn't neglect. This was methodical, deliberate control. A neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, approached the officers timidly. I sometimes heard noises, she confessed, wringing her hands. Like scratching, and once a whisper. I thought it was rats or something. Lawson didn't judge her. Guilt was already eating these people alive. Meanwhile, in the makeshift command tent outside, investigators pieced together Emily's background. She had no close family. Her husband had died 15 years earlier. Suspicious circumstances now being re-examined. Emily had become increasingly isolated, cutting off ties with friends and distant relatives. Bank records showed a pattern of disability benefit deposits, funds meant for Ethan's care, that had been spent on lavish home renovations, jewelry, and luxury vacations Emily took alone. Ethan had been hidden away to protect not just a lie, but a lifestyle. News vans began arriving by the dozens. The case of the closet boy, as the media cruelly dubbed him, was already exploding nationwide. But inside the house, the truth was far more horrific than any headline could capture. Behind a locked door in the basement, officers found what looked like a shrine. Photographs of Ethan. Not smiling or laughing, but crying, shrinking away, terrified, pinned to a corkboard. Journals filled with Emily's scrawled ramblings about purity and obedience. It wasn't just physical imprisonment. It was psychological torture, silent suffering, cultivated over years in absolute secrecy. Lawson stood in the basement doorway, feeling the cold seep into her bones. "We have enough," she said quietly. "Charge her with everything. Kidnapping, torture, abuse, fraud, depraved indifference." Above them, the house creaked, as if exhaling its long-held horrors into the heavy afternoon air. Outside, Ethan lay in a hospital bed, miles away, wrapped in clean sheets, blinking up at a world he had been taught to fear. The world was vast, overwhelming, terrifying, but it was no longer locked behind a door. And for the first time in his broken life, Ethan had a future, a fragile, painful, precious future. A future built not on silence, but on survival. First day of freedom. The hospital room in Jackson Memorial wasn't much to look at. Plain walls, a metal-framed bed, a humming IV machine. But for Ethan, it was nothing short of a palace. For the first time in his life, he lay under clean sheets without fear. He could turn his head freely, without hitting wooden walls. He could breathe air that didn't reek of mold and despair. This was his first day of freedom. Nurses moved quietly around him, checking monitors, adjusting tubes. They spoke softly, patiently, explaining everything before they touched him. Still, Ethan flinched with every movement. The silent scars ran deeper than anyone could see. Dr. Harrison, the attending physician, watched from the doorway. He had seen trauma before, car crashes, fires, assaults, but nothing prepared him for the raw fragility of this boy. "He's reacting to basic stimuli like he's expecting pain," Harrison murmured to the head nurse. "What do we do?" she asked. "Slow," Harrison said simply. "Everything must be slow, gentle. Give him control wherever we can." Meanwhile, in another part of the hospital, social worker Megan Carter pored over Ethan's sparse files. No birth certificate, no school records, no medical history beyond the forged documents Emily had submitted over the years. Ethan was, in many ways, a ghost child, born, hidden, forgotten. Megan scribbled notes. Trauma recovery plan, emergency guardianship, therapy evaluation. This wasn't just about saving Ethan. It was about teaching him how to exist. Later that morning, Officer Taylor stopped by. He wasn't officially supposed to visit, but he couldn't stay away. He brought a simple gift, a baseball cap with the logo of the Jackson Fire Department. "For when you're ready to see the world," he said awkwardly, setting it on the bedside table. Ethan didn't respond. He stared at the cap like it was a foreign object. But later, when no one was looking, he inched his hand toward it, touching it lightly with his fingertips. That tiny movement brought tears to the nurse's eyes. Outside, reporters clamored for interviews, headlines screaming about the closet boy and 20 years of hidden horror. But inside, Ethan fought a quieter battle, one heartbeat at a time. A therapist, Dr. Simmons, was brought in by the afternoon. She sat across the room, making no move toward Ethan. Instead, she spoke softly about her favorite trees, about how birds sang after rainstorms, about how sunlight felt against your skin. Ethan listened, silent, still. But he listened. That night, after the hospital quieted, Megan entered Ethan's room with a book. "Would you like me to read to you?" she asked. No answer. "It's okay," she said gently. "I'll just read, and you can listen if you want." She chose simple stories, tales of adventure, of faraway places, of brave boys who discovered hidden worlds. And for the first time since arriving, Ethan closed his eyes not from fear, but from exhaustion. The trauma recovery had only just begun. There would be nightmares, panic attacks, tears, but also there would be laughter someday, friendship, hope. Outside the window, the Mississippi sky stretched wide and endless, freckled with stars. Ethan didn't know it yet, but his new beginning had already started. He would learn to walk hallways without ducking his head. He would learn to ask for things without expecting punishment. He would learn that not every door needed to be feared, and maybe, just maybe, he would one day tell his story, not as a victim, but as a survivor, because silent scars might mark the body, but they didn't have to define the soul. Not anymore. The trial and a new life. 6 months later, the courthouse in downtown Jackson buzzed with an energy unlike anything the city had felt before. Reporters lined the steps. Protesters held signs demanding justice for Ethan. The air crackled with tension, with hope, with the unrelenting need for truth. Inside courtroom 3B, Ethan sat quietly beside Megan Carter, dressed neatly in a blue button-down shirt and khaki pants. He looked smaller than he really was, fragile, like a bird recently freed from a cage, but not yet sure how to fly. His hands shook under the table, but he kept them folded tightly together. He was here. He was ready. Today, justice for the victim had a name and a face. Emily, wearing a faded gray prison jumpsuit, sat slumped at the defense table, eyes hollow, skin sallow. Her attorney whispered to her frantically, but Emily stared straight ahead, empty and detached. Judge Ramirez, known for her firm but fair demeanor, presided over the court trial. Her gaze swept the room, commanding silence without a word. The prosecution began with chilling clarity. "For 20 years, the lead prosecutor said, voice steady, Ethan was robbed of everything. His freedom, his childhood, his dignity. Locked away, starved, lied to. All by the very person who was supposed to love him most." Gasps echoed in the gallery. Evidence was presented carefully, methodically. Photos of the closet where Ethan lived. Journals found in the basement. Testimonies from neighbors, doctors, social workers. Each piece formed a mosaic of cruelty that was impossible to deny. When it came time for witness statements, Megan spoke first. Her voice trembled slightly, but her words cut through the courtroom like a blade. "Ethan is not a statistic. He is not a ghost. He is a boy who deserved laughter, sunlight, and love. And now, finally, he will have them." Later, Officer Taylor took the stand. He recounted the discovery, the hidden door, the whispered plea, the sheer disbelief that something so monstrous had lived behind suburban walls. The defense tried to paint Emily as mentally ill, incapable of understanding her actions. But psychological evaluations revealed otherwise. Emily had been fully aware, fully calculating, fully responsible. As the trial progressed, Ethan never once looked at her. He focused instead on Megan, on Dr. Simmons, sitting in the gallery, on the future stretching quietly before him. When asked if he wished to make a statement, Ethan hesitated. Then, slowly, he rose. The entire courtroom held its breath. He approached the podium, small and shaking, but standing tall in a way that silenced even the most hardened reporters. "I don't hate you," he said simply, his voice hoarse but clear. "I just don't believe in you anymore." Judge Ramirez nodded, emotion flickering briefly across her stern face. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated for only 3 hours. Emily was found guilty on all counts: kidnapping, torture, fraud, aggravated child abuse. The sentencing was swift and brutal: life in prison without the possibility of parole. Outside the courthouse, people wept openly. Some clapped. Some simply stood in stunned silence, witnessing the rare moment when the system worked exactly as it should. Ethan didn't celebrate. He sat quietly in the back of the car as Megan drove him home. His new home, a foster family carefully chosen for their patience, their kindness, and their understanding of trauma. It was a small house on the edge of town, with a backyard full of sunflowers and a tree swing. His room was painted soft blue, with shelves ready for books he hadn't read yet, walls ready for posters he hadn't chosen yet. A new chapter was beginning. That night, lying in bed with the window cracked open to let in the cool Mississippi breeze, Ethan stared at the stars. No closet walls blocked his view. No locks held him captive. His healing journey would be long. There would be hard days, dark days, days when shadows felt closer than light. But there would also be days filled with music, with friendship, with dreams. As he drifted into sleep, one thought anchored him. I am here. I am free. I am more than what happened to me. And for the first time, Ethan believed it. Don't just watch. Stand with those who couldn't scream. Subscribe, comment, and let the world know you care.